You described yourself confidently to a colleague last week. Your working style, your boundaries, what you need to do your best. And then, in the same meeting, did none of it, not because you lied. Because the person across the table changed something in the room, and the version of you that knew all that quietly stepped aside for a version that was more concerned with how the moment was landing. That gap is not a failure of self-awareness. It is the place where self-knowledge actually lives, and most people have been looking in entirely the wrong direction. Self-knowledge is not a private possession. It is a social performance under pressure. And the version you believe in has mostly been tested in conditions where no one was watching. The first behavioral pattern to watch for is this: self-knowledge, as most people practice it, is a description of who they are when the stakes are low, in a quiet room, in a journal, in a conversation with someone they trust completely. A person's understanding of themselves can be remarkably precise. They know their patterns. They can name what they do under stress. They have a word for what they need. Researchers studying self-referential cognition have found that people's accuracy about their own behavior spikes dramatically when they are recalling events from a neutral emotional state, and drops sharply when they are inside an emotionally loaded one. You do this. You carry into every professional interaction a clear internal account of who you are, how you operate, what you will and will not compromise. That account is not wrong. It is simply developed in a laboratory with controlled conditions. The moment another person introduces social judgment, real or anticipated, the account begins to behave differently, and you are usually the last one to notice. People who operate this way tend to understand themselves as self-aware, and in the private dimension, they are. The gap is not in the quality of the self-knowledge. It is in where they have tested it. What looks like self-knowledge from the inside is often a carefully maintained theory about a person who only fully exists when no one else is in the room. This is not dishonesty. It is the natural result of doing the self-examination work in the wrong condition. The private self feels true because it has never been interrupted. In the next meeting you sit in, not eventually, tomorrow or the day after, watch for the moment you have a clear thought about what you need to say and then modify it based on who is in the room. That modification is not weakness. It is information. It is showing you where your self-knowledge stops being descriptive and starts being aspirational. The gap between what you knew and what you did is not a character question. It is a calibration question. The distance between private clarity and social behavior is not caused by weakness. It is maintained by function. The second behavioral pattern, the accuracy of self-knowledge, is inversely proportional to how much the social situation matters. This is not anxiety. It is not low confidence. It is a specific cognitive mechanism. The more consequential the room, the more processing resources the brain dedicates to social monitoring, which are the same resources that typically produce accurate self-reflection. You cannot fully watch yourself and fully watch the room at the same time. Most people have unconsciously chosen the room. Someone in a team meeting leans across the table and describes a working approach that contradicts yours. You have a clear internal response. You have thought about this. You know where you stand. And then you feel yourself begin to construct a response that is less about what you actually think and more about how disagreement will land with the three other people present, two of whom you cannot quite read. By the time you speak, you have performed a calculation so fast you barely felt it happen, and the version of yourself you expressed was averaged across an audience you were simultaneously trying to satisfy and assess. You do not experience this as a departure from your values. You experience it as being reasonable, being measured, being someone who reads the room. The self-concept this produces is of someone who is socially intelligent, and that is not entirely wrong, but it obscures something. The thing you call reading the room is partly that, and partly the control wound running a live override on your self-expression in real time. Researchers observing social performance across high-stakes interactions have noticed that people with the most sophisticated internal models of their own behavior are often the ones most prone to abandoning those models under social load, precisely because the model requires cognitive resources the situation has already claimed. In the next group context where someone challenges something you know to be true, not just something you prefer, something you have actually worked out. Notice how long it takes before you begin modifying your position, not whether you modify it. How long? The time gap is the measurement. Less than 4 seconds and the override is nearly automatic. That is not a social skill. That is the wound with a competence costume on. The third behavioral pattern. What people call self-knowledge is almost always a description of their preferences, not their behavior. This is where the self-examination most people have done runs out of road. Preference mapping. I am someone who values honesty. I work best with autonomy. I need direct communication. Is not self-knowledge. It is self-narration. The distinction matters because preferences are stable and behaviors are situational. And confusing one for the other creates a specific kind of blindness that is almost invisible from inside it. Here is the trap built into this law. Reading it, you will likely think of someone you know who does this, who talks about their values with confidence, and then acts in perfect contradiction of them. A colleague who says they prioritize transparency, and then withholds information strategically. Someone who describes themselves as direct, and then speaks in circles when the stakes are real. The recognition feels immediate because you have watched this pattern in other people with some frequency. That recognition is real. And it is also the law operating. The same perceptual mechanism that makes you excellent at cataloging this pattern in others is the one that protects you from cataloging it in yourself. The intelligence that notices is attached to the wound that deflects. You have been watching other people's self-narration with forensic clarity, in part because watching is cleaner than being watched. Especially by yourself. A woman in a project debrief described herself to her team as someone who thrives under pressure. She had said it before. She believed it. 2 weeks earlier, she had gone quiet in a senior meeting the moment the conversation became contentious. Not because she had nothing to say, but because the room had suddenly become the kind of room where saying it carried social cost. No one in the debrief connected the two moments. She did not connect them either. The self-description felt true because she had never formally examined whether the behavior confirmed it. The preference description is not a lie. It is a hypothesis that has never been subjected to the conditions that would test it. Most people's self-knowledge is a collection of untested hypotheses presented to themselves as established facts. Self-knowledge that has not been tested under social load is not knowledge. It is a story told in favorable conditions about a person who only exists there. The mechanism underneath this is not unique to how you see yourself. It governs how clearly any system can examine itself from inside itself. There are structural limits to self-perception that no amount of reflection can overcome, because the instrument of observation is the same instrument being observed. The gap is not a failure of effort. It is the shape of the problem. Every belief you hold about who you are was formed in the presence of other people, confirmed or denied by other people, and expressed most clearly or most distorted in their presence. The idea that self-knowledge is a private achievement, assembled through reflection, is the exact opposite of how it is actually built. It is built in rooms. It is tested in rooms. It fails and recovers and recalibrates in rooms. The person who knows themselves most accurately is not the one who has spent the most time alone, examining their patterns. It is the one who can observe the gap between their private certainty and their social behavior, without using the gap as evidence of failure. That gap is not where self-knowledge breaks down. It is where self-knowledge actually begins. The behavioral truth this entire examination has been circling is this: you do not know yourself in private. You discover yourself in the presence of people who make the discovery uncomfortable. The patterns underneath the ones examined here govern the specific moment where your private certainty meets resistance from another person. Not just social pressure, but deliberate opposition. And what happens to your behavior in that collision is information most people never formally collect. That information is harder to access than what has been shown here, and more consequential. Think of the last time you were certain about something, certain enough to have named it, described it, defended it privately, and then someone in a room with you expressed genuine doubt. Not hostility, not dismissal. Simply doubt. What happened to the certainty? Where did it go, and did you notice it leaving? If this message described something you recognized in yourself before you decided whether to recognize it, that response is worth paying attention to, not because it means something is wrong with you. Because it means the pattern is closer to the surface than you assumed, which means it is also closer to being accurately mapped. The next video in this series examines what happens specifically in the moment you receive feedback from someone whose opinion matters to you, not criticism. Feedback delivered with apparent goodwill. What your behavior does in that moment, and what it reveals about the gap between who you believe you are and who you are when the social cost of being yourself becomes real. If you are not subscribed, the algorithm will not show you that video when it comes out. That is not a pitch. It is a structural fact about how this platform works. Subscribe if continued access to this material serves you. And if something in this video landed in a way you have not fully processed yet, leave it in the comments. Not what you thought of the message, what you recognized. The most precise comments from this community become the source material for future scripts. Your pattern named accurately may be the thing that names it accurately for someone else.